Ever so often, I make a video critical of people held in high regard by conservatives or right wingers, such as John McWhorter or Glenn Lowry, and I begin to hemorrhage subscribers after such videos. Maybe because when I first started this channel, I was more right leaning, defending guys like Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter. But over time, I've grown to have a better understanding of things, and so my presentation may thus be off putting to some of my more right leaning subscribers. So, how do I lose more subscribers today? Oh, wait, let's talk some more shit about John McWhorter. A few days ago, I released a video with the title John McWhorter is a Lazy Thinker. In that video, I criticized John McWhorter for his lack of historical and intellectual depth in assessing the Palestinian issue, as well as his superimposing of American racial/slash cultural war narratives on a conflict that has nothing whatsoever to do with any of that. Unsurprisingly, some of my subscribers left in protest, and this is the total number of fucks I give about them leaving. I will not pull any punches in critiquing bad ideas, even bad ideas by those I follow and respect. And if anyone watching this isn't comfortable with the contrary opinions I present, they're free to leave. Now, for the rest of you gracious people of goodwill who won't get into their feelings when they encounter a contrary opinion, this is a place for you. In last week's episode of The Glenn Show featuring Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter did some more lazy thinking on the Israeli Palestinian conflict. His argument was that just because the culture or religion of the Palestinians is hostile to the lifestyle choices of many of the activists protesting on their behalf, such as the homosexuals or trans people, therefore it doesn't make sense for these activists to advocate for the rights of Palestinians. Glenn had a different opinion on this, which I think was spot on, and he pushed back on John McWhorter. But before I dive into that critique, I'd like to give credit where credit is due. I watched the whole of the episode and it was measurably better than the previous one that they had on the Israeli Palestinian issue. Either John had gone back to do his homework or he decided to apply his brain on the issue. One of the fantastic points John made was that pro Palestinian protest wasn't driven primarily by anti Semitism and that those who were making such claims were wrong.
Yeah, it does, Glenn. And, we're going to catch more hell for this than anything we've ever said about George Floyd, but I'm going to give my honest opinion. Yeah, I'm sorry, folks. I don't see it as anti-Semitism. I think that it's an anti-white imperialist thing. People are using, frankly, a rather easy mental schema. The white people on top, the black people on the bottom. It's not about whether someone's Jewish. It's about whether someone is, maybe you might say, a Zionist. It's about Israel. It's not that somebody has something against a Jewish person who happens to live in some other country. It's not about not liking a Jewish person who lives in Connecticut, except maybe to the extent that you think of them as, fans of Zionism. But it's not about a Jewish person who's living somewhere in Afghanistan or a Jewish person who's living somewhere in the eastern part of Russia. Nobody has any problem with Judaism in that sense, I don't think. It's about what certain Jews are doing in a certain country. Folks, yes, I know that there has been virulent anti-Semitism in the past, and I know that it exists now in its pure form. But I don't think that the student, the professor, the activist who today is looking at what Hamas did and pumping their fists in the air is doing it because they hate Jewish people. They hate Israeli Zionists because they're doing a thing that they consider imperialist and colonialist. I don't see it as the same thing. Of course, one answer is, well, anti-Semitism might be part of it. And I'd say, well, sure, but a small part. I find that rather simplistic here. This is about the hard left's feelings about colonialism. It's not about the Jew in history. That's my opinion.
Another great point he made was that continued Jewish settlement in the West Bank is an obvious obstacle to peace and should be stopped.
You know what? If I were running the United States, if this were up to me, my assistance with what would seem to have to happen with Hamas, if we're going to help with that, I would say only will we help if not a single settlement building is erected ever again, ever, basically, in the West Bank. The settlements have to stop. The idea that that's somehow defensible, whatever the defense is, I have never heard one that convinced me, although I've often been polite within the boundaries of social conversation. And a major effort would have to go into stopping renegade settlers, as they're called, from terrorizing Palestinians who are already there. That's got to stop. We have blood, both literal and moral, on our hands if we assist in the effort in Gaza while what's going on in the West Bank is blatantly unfair and often savage behavior coming from Israelis themselves. Not all of Israel, but these settlers, as they're called. They make life miserable often for Palestinians, not directly sanctioned by the government, but that has to stop. And no more settlement building. I don't see the justification of that.
For these great insights, I commend John. Now that we've gotten charity out of the way, let's look at where John had his lazy thinking.
Let's face it, in The Attackers, we're talking about a culture where women are relegated to roles that these people pumping their fists in the air would consider quite inappropriate. We're talking about people for whom toleration of homosexuality and transness is absolutely off the table. It's particularly interesting seeing gay people pumping their fists in the air about this because they would be in danger themselves just walking through the streets of Gaza.
How's that relevant, John? Excuse me for interrupting.
What John McWhorter is failing to understand is that those are separate issues. The issue of homosexuality and the issue of self-determination by the Palestinians are entirely separate things that should not be conflated. We can all agree that the homophobia by Palestinians is not in the best interest of gay people. But the fact that the Palestinians are homophobic doesn't mean that a gay person should not or cannot empathize with their struggles of self-determination. In fact, these activists have proven to be more altruistic, principled, and consistent than their detractors. They have absolutely nothing to positively gain from the struggle of the Palestinians, yet they still support them. This shows them to be consistent with their principles of being fundamentally against the oppression of any people. And the fact that they're not making an exception on that principle just because the people they are fighting for are homophobic is quite admirable. Same cannot be said of the principled consistency of many right wingers who haven't raged against cancel culture and suppression of free speech for years and now champions of cancel culture and censorship now that it favors them. Dave, the big brain Rubin, praised the move by the French government to stifle free speech by banning pro Palestinian protests, and so did many other conservatives. So much for conservative principles, or lack of it. If you're only willing to stand up for the rights of those who are religiously, culturally, or ideologically aligned with you, then you have no principles. Being principled shouldn't be contingent on whether another person aligns with your values. The conflict in Palestine is not akin to a culture war. If it were, I would be on the side of Israel, as my culture would align more closely with Israel than with the Palestinians. The conflict is not fundamentally a religious one. If it were, I would be on the side of Israel, as my religious beliefs would align more closely with Israel's than with the Palestinians. The conflict is fundamentally about self determination and the brutal oppression of Palestinians by Israel. And the reason I support the struggle of the Palestinians, despite the religious, ideological, and cultural schism between theirs and mine, is because I'm against the oppression of any people, whether they be Christian, Jew, Muslim, whether they be European, African, or Asian. Just because the culture and religion of Palestinians isn't compatible with mine doesn't mean I should turn a blind eye to their legitimate struggle or applaud their oppression. Fundamentally, we're all humans before we're a certain religion or tribe or any other identity. Glenn Lowry picked up on the weakness of John's position and pushed back beautifully.
It's particularly interesting seeing gay people pumping their fists in the air about this because they would be in danger themselves just walking through the streets of Gaza.
How's that relevant, John? Excuse me for interrupting. I agree with the assessment. You don't want to be openly gay on the streets of Tehran or in front of Hamas. But how's that relevant to the way in which American progressives who might be gay might react to what they take to be the moral offense of Zionism and the occupation of Palestine?
That was a very good point by Glenn. How is any of that relevant to the issue at hand? This is binary thinking by John. It supposes that there are only two options and that both options are in contradiction to one another, when the reality is that there are multiple options that can be true at the same time. It can be true that gay people can condemn the fact that they can be thrown off buildings in Palestine, as well as it can be true that gay people can condemn the fact that Israel has continued to blockade Gaza for decades and is currently carrying out indiscriminate bombings, needlessly killing civilians, including children in Gaza. This whole point by John McWhorter is at best amateurish. Now, if you're looking for something fun and exciting to read, check out my crime fiction novel, which features a debate on race and colonialism. Grab a copy and enjoy the read. The link is in the description of the video. So that's the video. If you like what we do on this channel, consider becoming a channel member or patron. However, your likes, shares, and views are just as valued.